Hello, everyone. We're really excited for today's webinar, and we're so thankful to our sponsor, AD Instruments, who has been just phenomenal support to HAPS throughout many, many years. AD Instruments has just always been behind HAPS and helping us to, better teach physiology in the labs. And if we go to the next slide, one of AD Instruments' big contributions has been the Sam Drogo Technology in the Classroom Award. Every year they give a wonderful scholarship to a HAPS member who is doing, creative and fun things in the classroom or in the labs and using, physiology. So we're really thankful for AD Instruments and all their support over many, many years. Today, AD Instruments is sponsoring this webinar, and we're excited to have Stephen Stelly with us to present some fun stuff. Stephen has a background. His graduate work was in exercise physiology and integrative physiology, and he taught in academia for a number of years in Texas. He's now living in Colorado, married, got a couple of young kids, and he's been with AD Instruments now for about a year, and he's really loves to support educators. And so we're so excited to have Steve as part of our virtual conference, our HAPS virtual conference. And so, Steve, I'm going to turn the time over to you. We're excited to have you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are, what time zone you're in. Thank you, Mark, for that nice introduction. Hello, Hapsters. I think that's what y'all are calling yourselves on Canvas, which is pretty cool. Hopefully it's okay that I said that. I just recently started to get involved with HAPS. I've really enjoyed it so far. And so I'm going to share my screen. So I've got a little webinar here that I'm going to go over, implementing physiological recordings in a lecture-style classroom with portable sensors. So talking about the idea of, are there ways that we can bring a more active or interactive element into the lecture component of a class? All right, so the agenda today, meet the presenter. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. We'll have a quick little poll, kind of set the stage, the background, the context for the webinar, go over some scenarios, kind of how implementing sensors and active components in the classroom, lecture classroom work, wrap things up, and have a little Q&A if anybody's got some questions. So this is me. I currently work as an education application specialist at AD Instruments. So my role broadly covers a good chunk of the US and all of Canada, supporting educators, connecting with people, understanding them, learning them, supporting them in a variety of ways. Prior to coming to ADI, I was in academia, educator and a researcher for several years at several different institutions in Texas and Michigan. And then my background, my undergraduate and master's work was in kinesiology, exercise physiology-esque stuff, kind of environmental physiology. And then I did a PhD in integrated physiology up in Michigan and Michigan Tech. I had a lot of great experiences and really enjoyed that. And now I get to connect with a lot more institutions, a lot more people across North America. And so that's a lot of fun. That's me. I've taught a lot within the realm of, I guess, anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and such, so things that I'm sure a lot of y'all have familiarity with. All right, so a quick poll here. So if you use that annotate feature, this will give you a chance to practice it. We got a couple questions here, so you can put a little stamp or a mark or something in one of these slots. So just kind of give a context for where people are at. So have you taught in a lecture style classroom before? And have you used interactive activities in a lecture style classroom? All right, so it looks like most people have had experience teaching, or maybe 50% have had experience teaching in a lecture style classroom, so maybe a lot of y'all in the lab, and then it looks like a lot of y'all go with the interactive elements. And we're going to move on to the next slide. So we're going to set the stage here a little bit. So my intention here, this webinar, is not to talk at you and tell you this is what's right, this is what's wrong, you should do this, you should not do that, but rather just to share some information that I've ascertained through my own experience, through reading peer-reviewed publications, things that y'all are probably aware of yourselves, but just to kind of set the kind of factual, objective landscape about the educational classroom environment, and offer some examples of ways that you could apply if you're not doing already, or just some examples, whether it's just to see things, to kind of stimulate some thoughts, or some options for you to make lectures that traditional space that tends to be more passive, more dynamic and interactive, and then provide some information about a specific hardware and software application that AD Instruments has specifically for that. So a little background information here. So kind of what's going on right now, education and higher education has existed for many, many years, long time. And so currently we have broad economic challenges, right? We have economies that are struggling, we have high inflation, there's lots of kind of social and economic challenges and negatives that are occurring that both affect people like in reality, maybe like funding's an issue, maybe funding's tight, maybe people are having to make harder choices about things, but also it's just kind of like creates a atmosphere of stress when people come into the classroom, whether it's instructors or students. They're maybe feeling a little more stressed, a little more down, a little more bummed about different things going on. It feels like we're in more of a lull period in terms of kind of the place we are at in life, in the world right now. And then most higher education institutions get the majority of their revenue from student tuition. So most universities have a lot of money. Most of that money is coming from students paying tuition. So it's going to be important to the institution. The more students they have, the more money they get, then the more money they have available to fund education and other programs. Higher education student enrollment, it declined during the pandemic, which I'm sure we're all aware of, that it was kind of stable and going up. Pandemic hit, really threw the world for a loop. Student enrollment declined. And since then, the higher education student enrollment broadly, like across the board in the US, is still currently below the pre-pandemic level. So it declined, and it's been kind of stable or increasing since the pandemic, but it hasn't gotten up to above pre-pandemic. So we're still less than what the pandemic, prior to the pandemic. And then graduate student enrollment is increasing less. So it seems like that both the enrollment is kind of stable / increasing, but still below pre-pandemic levels. And there's more of a shift toward, we'll say, students spending a short amount of time in higher education. So more toward associate's degrees over a bachelor's degree. And graduate student enrollment is not increasing as much. So less students going to graduate school, more undergraduate students focusing on a shorter time period in associate's level degree versus a bachelor's level degree. The majority of classroom spaces at institutions of higher education are still lecture style, and there's a couple of reasons for that. There's both like the kind of traditional reason. Traditionally, it was kind of thought that that was the ideal teaching environment. Students come in the classroom, they sit down, the teacher knows what the teacher knows. Students need to sit there and listen to the teacher disseminate knowledge, give them knowledge. There's that kind of like traditional reason for that being the primary classroom environment at institutions, but also it's less expensive and less logistically challenging. If you can just have a large, simple space and put lots of seats in there, you can get more students in there. So it's less expensive, like to build that infrastructure, and it's easier because we have chairs fixed in place, or we have tables and chairs that we kind of move around, but it's simpler. And so there's both kind of logistical cost reasons. Also, more butts in seat, more tuition, universities make more money. So there's a variety of reasons that that's kind of the commonplace experience. And it's also quite common for key undergraduate courses to have both a separate lecture and laboratory component. Lecture components are probably typically, as we probably experienced ourselves, more passive, more disseminating knowledge, and the laboratory kind of being the active component. You come to class, you sit there, you get the information you need, you go to lab, you apply it. But there typically is that physical and time separation of those components. And so that's a lot of the kind of the thought here. I'm sure a lot of y'all are thinking too, how can we integrate those things? Maybe we have different people teaching the lecture and lab component. So there's that instructor separation. There's a physical separation too. Maybe they occur in different spaces. Maybe they occur at different times on different days. And so there's less connectivity. And so maybe it's harder for students to see that connectivity. And so are there ways that we can bridge that gap better? And then generally students, so like when you poll student satisfaction, generally students are more satisfied with an active learning classroom environment. So students tend to find it more satisfying when they can be involved beyond sitting and listening and taking notes. Not that it's not enjoyable, and some students obviously enjoy that, but overall, the more active you can get in the process, the more they tend to enjoy that. So here are a few scenarios that I want to go over. And before we get to them, today I'll be using some AD Instruments software and hardware. So AD Instruments is a company that's been around for almost 37 years, and they exist within the life science realm, within research and education. And they have software and hardware applications. In this case, the hardware, LT sensors, which you can see represented here on the slide, are basically simple sensors. So they have some sort of component end, whether it's a grip force transducer or a tenon hammer or something that's collecting information, and then it's just connected with a cord to a USB. You can see here that plugs directly into a computer. So it's a very simple, portable sensor, light. I have one here that I'll be using later. So they're very simple and light, and they plug into a computer, and then they use the software LT, which we describe as our online cloud-based learning platform, as the software to run, the application that runs and displays that real-time data collection information. And it can do a lot more too, and you'll see a little bit. But just to set the background, that's what I'll be using specifically for today. So context here, I'm sure a lot of y'all think about it, and you hear this a lot in terms of training, whether it's we're training students or whoever it may be for something that typically takes a long time, and you're training them something for more complex, this idea of crawl, walk, run. So they're starting at something simpler, something slower, and they're building on that because we're wanting them to get to the place where they can run, but you can't just go from sitting to running. You need to take steps, crawl, walk, run. And I also think about it within kind of this idea of like slowly churning and chewing on information. If you give students everything at once, then it can be overwhelming. And so I'm imagining how this fits in is you have some sort of pre-class meeting activity, right? Before you come to class, I need you to review this. Read this in the textbook, look at this PDF I sent you, read this research article, review these PowerPoint slides, whatever it may be. I want to give you some information in advance. I want you to sit on that, mull over it, chew on it, think about it, come to class with something. Then you're in class, and we can do something in class. You can sit there and I can talk to you, or we can do more. And then there's some sort of post-class activity. Maybe I have you do an assignment after class that builds on what we've talked about. It could be a variety of things. And then a lot of classes have that associated lab component, so kind of thinking about it within the context of not only is there this lecture kind of before class, during class, after class, but there might be some sort of interactive lab component. So how can we have all these things integrate together in a way that students are getting paced nicely and going through this kind of crawl, walk, run? And so I've got a few scenarios here, a few examples of ways that we could add to this to help students go, because I feel like with the traditional lecture format, if students are getting little to no information prior to class, and then coming in and sitting there and you're hoping that they're absorbing what you're sharing with them, and who knows what they're doing before and after class, and they're coming to lab, it might feel like more of a crawl run for them. So is there a way that we could help them along better, encourage them, challenge them? That's what I like to think about with students, kind of supporting them, preparing them, and challenging them. So finding out what they want, why are they here, what is their goal, what is their purpose, supporting them in that, helping prepare them for whatever might come with the next class, the lab activity, the next semester, life after this degree, etc. And then challenging them, taking them out of their comfort zone and challenging them, giving them experiences that will help them grow, make them a little uncomfortable in a safe way, and help them grow. And probably not things that they would be able to do on their own. All right, so I've got 3 scenarios here, 3 examples, and then we'll use LT. So we'll jump into LT and then go through these 3 scenarios with some interactive elements to kind of give you an idea. So some ways you could potentially look at implementing things within a lecture environment. All right, so I'm still sharing my screen. Can everyone see that I've changed my screen to LT? Okay, sweet, I see some head bobs, thank you, excellent. So now this is LT, so this is in a web browser. So I was on slides, I just tabbed over, and now I'm in a web browser. And what this is the LT platform, and we're looking at the student view. So I set up a course for our HAPS seminar, and I just have 1 lesson available just for this. And so this is what students would see when they log in, for example, if you haven't seen LT before. And you can make this, put pictures on here to make it prettier. So I'm going into this. And so how I'm imagining this, if you were using, say, something like an LT sensor during class, You might not want to, you could use LT as kind of like your slides, right? If you're presenting in a lecture style format and go through it in that way, or you could use it where you have slides going back and forth, or you could use it in a way where you had LT and maybe some live real-time data collection in one panel if you're using it, say, as like a demonstration, and your slides open, whether there were two things on the same screen or if you had two different screens, depending on your technology setup in the classroom. So there's a variety of ways that you could implement this. But how I'm imagining is maybe you're going through a physiology course or anatomy and physiology course, and you're talking about a topic. Maybe it's the cardiovascular system, and you don't want to just share information. Well, you want to give students a little bit, at the beginning of class, but then you want to show some examples too. Maybe not something to the full depth that you would in lab, because in the lecture environment, you probably have somewhere around maybe an hour, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. And so you don't have as much time. The spacing's different. If you're in a lecture, like a stadium style, lecture classroom, like the environment's totally different. And so you got to work with what you got. So maybe can we find something that's interactive, but maybe more simple, that gives them a little nibble before they get the full meal, little appetizer, before they get the full meal in lab. And so in this case, that's how I'm imagining is you're talking in lab, or you're talking in class rather, blah, 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 cardiovascular system, we've got the heart, we've got blood vessels, et cetera, et cetera. And so maybe you want to go into something, you want to use some sort of signal, say it's heart rate. And so in this case, you could introduce it. Okay, so now I want to go into heart rate. And maybe you want to go over a few key components, like what is heart rate? Well, heart rate is the rate or the frequency at which the heart beats. What does it represent? Well, it kind of represents that regular pumping, right, of the circuit, that kind of pumping, that flow of the circulatory system, this rhythmic flow of blood throughout the body, being delivered, delivering oxygen and nutrients, right? How do we measure it? Well, right, we typically, and maybe students, this could give them a little exposure if they haven't, right? You want to find some sort of site where you can palpate an artery and feel that change in the artery, kind of thumping against you, right? As blood is pumping, it's going in and out, if you will. And so in this case, we can use a pulse transducer for that. And so I literally have, this is just little pulse transducer that will fit on my finger, like you can see in the diagram there. It's just connected to the computer via USB. So I just have it plugged into a USB hub. So it's very simple and really easy to have this in your pocket or your bag, take it to class with you, whether you had just one set to do a live demonstration on yourself or a fellow student, or you had multiple sets to share with groups of students in the class, depending on your funding situation, your class size information. So I can very easily just stick this on my finger. And then you might want to go over some expected values. Like, okay, when we're measuring heart rate, we measure it in beats per minute, typically is the units we're represented as. And typically, a person at rest is going to have somewhere in the range of 60 to 100 beats per minute, right? And maybe you're standing, maybe you're sitting, and so it could be expected on that range. Go over a little bit of equipment setup here. I've got a couple diagrams. So all I have is a pulse transducer on my finger, plugged into the computer. And so say for scenario one, say I want to do some sort of real-time data collection. I've done this before. I'm sure some of y'all have too, where you have yourself or a student volunteer come down, say to the front of the classroom during lecture, and you're like, oh, I want to go over this concept and give y'all a visual. Maybe I don't have the room or the equipment for everyone to do everything right here in lecture. We'll save that for lab, but I want to do a little something. And so this is a data collection panel in LT. All I have to do is plug this in, attach it to myself, click start, and now, as you can see, hopefully there's not too much lag. I've got to really zoom in here. This is my pulse in real time, and then it's doing some calculations, which have different options here. In this case, I have 3 things set up so students can see a little more information. It makes things a little more simple for them, I think, which can be a good nibble initially. So I'll try to relax my finger here. So you've got finger pulse, so you see the pulse waveform here. Got a little noisy there when I move my hand. Then it's calculating heart rate and beats per minute here. And then it's got pulse amplitude, which as I'm just sitting here with it on my finger, it's not changing. And so right now I'm sitting at home in my office and I am doing a webinar. So I'm talking, a little nervous. My heart rate is bumping up and down a little bit, a little high. It works. So you could use this as a way, sometimes, a lot of times in textbooks, they'll have some sort of representative graph. So you're just giving students information. Like here is this representative graph that may match reality, just adjusted it there. And so this is a way for them to see something in real time and see both how it might fit what they would expect when they're looking at a textbook, but how also it can be messy. If I move around, if I pinch my finger, if I wiggle my finger, we get noise. And so it gives them an introduction to some additional information that will be relevant when they're in lab. I know sometimes students can get really confused when they're dealing with noise. They think, oh man, my heart rate's going crazy. It's like, well, no, your heart rate's not going crazy. Your finger's going crazy. It's different. And so that gives a little more information. And you could take this to another level, right? You can make this more interactive. You could do things such as say, you could ask student, you could do different things. Say like, I'm gonna stand up. I'm sitting down, I'm gonna stand up. What do you think is gonna happen? Poll the class by show of hands. Show me. Or you could do something like, I'm standing up, I'm gonna lay down. I'm gonna jog in place. What happens if I start moving my hands? Am my heart rate going up? Or is it just I'm wiggling my finger around and it's representing that? You could have them ask you stuff. That's always fun to do. I think, students like it, right? When we get a little silly, maybe in a professional context. And so, hey, what do y'all want me to do? Give me something to do. Okay, I'm gonna do it. What do you think is gonna happen to my heart rate or whatever you're measuring? Okay, you want me to stand on my hands? Okay. You want me to roll around the floor? You want me to breathe quickly? You want me to breathe slowly? You want me to hold my breath? What do you think is gonna happen to my heart rate if I do that? You could take a poll, whether it's your iClicker, have students write down things, make a little hypothesis. Maybe jot down, a hypothesis and give me a couple words why you think my heart rate would change in this way if it does when I did this. So it's a way for them to interact with it. I feel like a lecture, especially if this is prior to them going to lab, it's a good opportunity for them to make some mistakes, not get it right, not really understand, not really know, just try and be comfortable in that space of like, I don't really know what's gonna happen. Let's see what happens. Because I feel like then they'll be more comfortable when they come into lab being like, okay, I have a little experience. I know a little bit, but maybe I'm more comfortable with, I don't know, and that's okay. And so there's a variety of ways that this could be implemented. And you can obviously do this with a variety of signals, an EMG, an EKG, an EEG, maybe something that seems more complex and more foreign or difficult for students to understand. Maybe pulse is nice but simple. So you want to do an EKG. That can be a harder concept for students to understand when you're trying to go through things, and going through vectors and all this kind of stuff. You can be like, look, I have these electrodes on my body right now. They're right here. Okay. And when you see this tracing, that's where it's going. And so you can help visualize things for students a little bit. So I'm going to stop that. And you could be talking, take a break from talking. And I feel like, maybe it's a good opportunity for us as instructors to be a little vulnerable. Let students see our heart rate, let's see that we're human. Maybe we're fit and we've got a low heart rate. Maybe we're not fit and we don't have a low heart rate. Maybe we're nervous. Even teaching for years, I would get nervous. The first day of every class, I'd always be nervous. I'm sure y'all have similar experiences. So it lets us just be human and connect with students and let them not only see us doing, hear us doing stuff or talking about stuff, but letting them see us do it as well. Next, I want to move on to scenario 2 here. And so this could be something where, say, you don't have the equipment, you want to use real data, but maybe you don't have the equipment, maybe you don't really want to show it, maybe you want to give them some more data that's more complex, that would take longer to record, or you don't have the equipment and you want them to interact with it more, as opposed to just seeing it. So in this case, I have data. And so this is, again, pulse data. And this is real data. This is me. I hooked myself up to a pulse transducer and I collected my pulse and I put little comments in here to mark different things. This is real data I could collect on myself or someone else and put into LT and then have students interact with it with questions. You could have them in groups and they could see this information, this data, and they could scroll through it. They could use point selectors and section selectors here to select different data, get different information, and go through and answer questions. So I've got comments here, seated baseline, did that for 30 seconds, and then I've got another segment 1, did that for 30 seconds. So what I did was I went through here and I did different things for 30-second intervals. And you could do something like that. So it's simple, short data, have students go through it. What do you think this represents? Okay, what does seated baseline represent? Now, has the data changed in segment 1 from seated baseline? Okay, what ways it changed and what do you think is going on? did the person do something? And it gives them a chance to explore. Maybe they saw that heart rate went up, and so maybe they thought, oh, maybe that person stood up. Maybe they started walking around. Maybe the heart rate went down. If they were sitting and relaxed and their heart rate got lower, what would they do that would cause that to happen? And so you can use that as a way to give people a different experience, to get them thinking about it, where they could answer individually, answer as a group. The idea was that one of y'all would get access to LT, and that you could answer things as a group, and one person could type this in and interact with the stuff and share their screen and show you. I could have done this via Zoom with the annotate feature, and we could have kind of gone back and forth and stuff. That would have been a little more complicated. So there's different ways you could try and apply this. Maybe have them actually do some calculations, go through there and calculate heart rate. It's not terribly challenging to calculate, but I find the first time students are calculating something, even if it's seemingly simple, it can throw them off because they're having to think about how do I solve this problem that I never saw before. And so it's a way for students to interact with that. So that's kind of the second scenario option I was thinking of. If you had the data in advance, you weren't necessarily bringing the data happening real time to class, but you could bring the data after the fact and have students interact with it. And then the third scenario here would be, I'm kind of thinking of these as almost like different levels of interaction or complexity. Say you had a group and you had enough portable sensors to bring around, and so you could give one sensor to every group of 2 to 5 students or whatever it may be. Now they can, but something simple, you don't necessarily want to like just replicate lab and lecture, but could you do something where I give you a little information that have you do like a little experiment that's a kind of a step up to lab. And maybe you don't do it obviously every class, maybe you do it every other class, maybe you do it once a week. You find a way that kind of seems to fit well, that gives students some different experiences, so they're not just going to class with the same experience every time. So in this case, again, you could do the real-time data collection, have students collect their own data in real time, but this time have them do it. And you could do it in different ways. So in this, as an example here, you'd have students branch off. And this was something simple where even if you had a kind of stadium style seating, you could have students sit around in groups of a few people around them and do this, put a pulse transducer on, hook it to their computer if they brought a computer with them. Obviously, it depends on really your technology setup. You can access LT with a phone, with a tablet, so you can interact it beyond the data collection, with a lot of things that students regularly have with them. But a lot of students have computers with them nowadays too. And so you could potentially incorporate this, be like, hey, try to remember to bring a computer to class, once a week on this day, or however you'd like to do it. And then you can have them go through it. Okay, I want you to record these 30-second intervals, take turns. Okay, Andy's gonna have the pulse transducer on, and these other 2 people are like, all right, Andy, sit there. 30 seconds elapses. All right, stand up, please. All right, can you lay down, please? Can you turn around in a circle? Can you hyperventilate, breathe at a higher frequency than you normally do? Can you hold your breath for 30 seconds? Have them do different things and see if it changes the data. And you could do things where they predetermine it, right? I'm gonna do these things in advance. And I'm gonna hypothesize what's gonna happen, or just do them and then calculate the differences afterwards. Something that's not super time consuming, but is interactive. So you're not eating up all the lecture time, but you're making it a little more interactive. And so that's kind of the example here. And I can give any of y'all that want access to this LT course after this webinar, if you want to see it and actually poke around with it and look at it. And so those were 3 different scenario ideas that I thought of, that ways that you can implement something like a portable sensor system. And so what I'm going to do now is I've got a little extra time. And just to give you an example too, like you can make this more complex if you wanted. For example, say you wanted to hook yourself up in advance with a biopotential sensor. So say you've got something like this, where you've got lead wires that are connected to electrodes that you pre-attach to your body, to your torso prior to the start of this webinar, and you're trying not to make it fall off your leg, and you've got this pulse transducer attached to your finger, and you want to give students a little more information, kind of see heart rate represented in different ways. It's a more complex panel that's available in LT. And so I can click start here. And now what we've got is we've got your ECG. This is a lead 2 ECG on me in real time, my finger pulse. Again, I'm gonna zoom in here in real time. And now it's heart rate, and we got finger pulse amplitude again. And so now you're getting students to see a couple different things, right? Your finger pulse, represents your heart rate, but it's really being measured at the tip of your finger. So you're relying on blood to get pumped from your heart, and that kind of systolic wave to go through your blood vessels to the tip of your finger, hit that transducer, and give you a little waveform. And so that gives you some information. And then you've got this ECG, which is tracking electrical activity of the heart. So you can get your heart rate from the ECG as well. It's a little noisy as I'm talking right now, but it's a way to get different, you can see kind of the same information represented from different sources.
Where do you have the electrodes placed? I didn't even notice your setup there.
Yeah, I was sneaky it beforehand. So I've got lead 2, so right shoulder to left torso, and then I've got a ground over here,
Okay.
right torso.
Got it.
I have 3 electrodes attached to me. I've got lead wires. And this is something I've done before for classes. You know, you just in your office or go in the bathroom, attach some electrodes to yourself, go to class, have them under your thumb. I mean, I just got the lead wire sticking out. So it's really simple and, you know, maintains privacy and something you can obviously do yourself. So this would be a way as an example that you can make things more complex. You're not only stuck with the simplicity of, say, a pulse waveform. And everything in LT is fully customizable. And so if you wanted to make a panel, you know, bigger or smaller, add different questions or other elements or pictures, and there's so much you can do. I've just done this as an example, but while I had a few extra minutes, I wanted to show y'all that and you can make things more complex. And it can be really helpful, whether it's a more complex topic that can be harder for students to understand, like a EEG or an ECG. And it's maybe a little more exciting to look at an ECG waveform versus a pulse. And as an instructor, right, it's a way for you to collect this data on yourself, right? It's a great way, great side benefit to keep track of your own kind of health and functioning of your own body. I've used that over the years, you know, a little check-in on yourself. So a little ancillary benefit there. And it's good for students, you know, a lot of fun things. I've had several instances, and I'm sure y'all have as well, where you have someone hooked up to an ECG in the lab and you discover an abnormal ECG tracing and they had no idea. And now they're aware, and you can make a copy of that and they can go take it to their doctor if they'd like, and they have a little more information on themselves. So there's lots of little extra benefits as well. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides here. So those are 3 different example scenarios. I employed the AD Instruments LT sensors along with LT as the hardware and software there. And then just to wrap things up, as we've all, I'm sure, experienced, you know, for some students, sitting there in class and hearing things and taking notes is enjoyable and sufficient, and for some students it's not. And so we want to provide an environment that really helps prepare students well, supports them well, and is satisfying to them because they've taken this endeavor and made this commitment to go to college and pursue this thing that they're pursuing. And so we want to try and best support them in that way. A quick anecdote, I always imagine there was a student I had one time. It was this big class, it's like anatomy physiology course, 150, 200 students, lecture, stadium style lecture classroom. And I was, you know, giving the lecture, and there was a student, and he was up near the top, kind of in the middle, and he was sitting in the stadium seat, and there was really no one around him. He had, you know, one arm on the top of each seat next to him, and one foot on the top of each seat in front of him, and he was just conked out, taking a nap. And that was his experience. And I try not to take it personally, but I feel like it was reflective of, like, for him being there, you know, it was a better fit for him to take a nap than to, you know, do anything else. And so some students have that experience and so we want to kind of, you know, take that in mind, I think, everybody's experience, and try and make it the best for everybody, which is not going to be perfect. And some people are going to be happy, and some people are going to be unhappy, but just wanted to provide y'all some thoughts of different things to think about so you could take that with you. All right, so that's a wrap on that. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd be happy that you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them. Feel free to check out the ADRN's website for information there, or send me an email if you'd like as well. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you, Stephen, so how do you envision this? Would this be something you do maybe for part of a class period once a week, or every day you'd have a new idea of a demonstration, or how would you see that fitting into your teaching sort of regimen?
No, that's a good question. The way I've thought about it, because LT is very versatile, where you could use it, say, in a lab setting as well to do more complex lab activities. If you had, say, a course, which was common, I'm sure as y'all experience, in my experience, to have a anatomy and physiology course, I'm really interested in kind of thinking about how to, like, integrate those together. I think traditionally how I've taught them before and how others were, you would kind of do like your anatomy section and then your physiology section, whether it's flip-flopping or kind of one half this semester than the other. But I'm imagining in a way where ideally you could set it up, whether it's the same instructor teaching lecture and lab or different instructors, so that you're really getting this, maybe in the lab, whether we're using LT or otherwise, we're doing a lot of in-depth stuff. And so if I'm going to do some kind of resting and exercise EKG in the lab, maybe have like kind of like a 2-week lead up. So maybe the week before we're doing that lab, I'm going over some concepts in lecture, and maybe I'm employing a couple class periods where I'm having some more interactive elements, maybe without LT and with LT, where I'm giving them a little bit of crawl, walk, run. Maybe we're doing some stuff on paper with EKGs, looking at tracings, measuring stuff, and then we're actually maybe measuring ourselves a little bit or doing some pulse stuff in the classroom as part of lecture, and then going to the lab so they can have kind of this stepping stone approach. And so hopefully by the time they get to the lab, they've had some experience outside of class and in class. And so it's not just the, what the heck is this? And they're just kind of blank faced for that time in lab. Is kind of how I've imagined that.
Thank you.
Steve, Mark Nielsen, do you have the ability to have sensors that can monitor muscle activity, EMGs?
Yeah, so currently AD Instruments has developed 8 different LT sensors, and I should pull those up on the website really quick. And so one of the biopotential sensor, which is the one that I was using to measure my EKG or ECG earlier, that is, we call it a biopotential sensor because you can use lead wires, and we've got a couple other Zoom polls that popped up here too. But you can use those to connect essentially any sort of biopotential signal where you're sticking an electrode on yourself, and then you are measuring something. So EEG, EMG, EKG. So you can do all that with that biopotential sensor. So these are the current 8 sensors that AD Instruments has: grip force, tin and hammer, blood pressure, respiratory belt, skin temperature, biopotential, which is your EKG, EMG, EEG traditionally. You can do other stuff with it as well. Cardio microphones, you can do that with like carotid cough sounds or palpations, and then the pulse transducer. And then we're developing more. Like the next sensor will come out will be a spirometer, and then we have more in the pipeline coming out as well. So there'll be continual iterations of new LT sensors coming out in the future.
So I guess the EMG is really, you could only really do that on muscles that are, surface muscles, right?
Right. You're going to do larger muscles, more superficial muscles. I mean, which gives you a lot of options. The biopotential sensor has, I'll stop sharing. It has, if you can see here, it's got 5 different ports. And so you have a ground, and then you can have a bipolar, and then you have 2 different bipolar options. So essentially you could do 2 different EMG sites at once if you wanted. So if you want to have, contralateral muscles, or if you want to have 2 different people with the same muscle, and you could compare, so you can do different things. You can have kind of agonist, antagonist muscles. There's a lot of, options you could do.
Yeah, I think you could have a lot of fun with that one in a classroom.
Right. Put EMG electrodes on your bicep and your triceps. We've all got probably some backpacks or books with us. You could do simple things that maybe you're going to expand on the lab with maybe some stimulation or some other exercise activities. But yeah. Marianne.
Yeah. I do physiology, but on invertebrates. And I use AD Instruments like for the cockroach nerve stimulation one I've done on the earthworm. Would there be opportunity to do something like this, but not on humans? Like would there be electrodes or something that would apply for invertebrates, or that's something that's later on down the line, or maybe not even possible?
I mean, you'd probably use like a bioamp, right? That looks like this.
Yes.
So you could plug in other lead wires into the bioamp to collect some more signals. And the focus right now with the LT sensors, as you probably saw on the screen, is more human applications. But more stuff will be coming out in the future. But yes, you could plug in different lead wires and get some different signals.
Great, thank you.
Sure. There's my email in the chat. You can email me if you have questions, or if you want me to give, I can give you access to that course that I made, that lesson in LT, or I can give you access as a student to either, like all the LT sensors lessons, so you could just kind of see the variety of pre-existing content options that you could, if you use them, edit them on your own, or you could create your own as well. But so you're welcome to email me. Also, if you're curious about any resources where I got some of the information about education and classroom landscape, let me know. I'm happy to send you that information as well. Let's see, what does Craig say? Oh, comparing pulse reading and temperature at the same time. Yeah, you could definitely do that, Craig. So we have the skin temperature sensor. So you can plug in multiple LT sensors at once. So with LT sensors in LT, you have different data sampling panels that you can select that have been pre-set up for different combinations of sensors at once. And so you could do that, right, where you have multiple different kinds of sensors at once, where you could have, it might be a little tricky in a lecture environment to change the temperature of your hand. But yeah, you could do all sorts of interesting things that in a simple way, but that might be, or even have students, be like, hey, here's a few sensors, we've got this hour in lecture, and we need to come up with something, so you could try and employ in different ways. Really, obviously, it's going to be limited by the space you have and your students. And obviously, there's going to be some troubleshooting aspect. LT is pretty easy to navigate. So you'd probably want to go over it with your students in advance so you can mitigate troubleshooting issues. And obviously, some students are going to be really into it, others are not. I had one student one time come up to me and say, you seem like a really nice guy, and I appreciate that you're trying to get to know people, but I don't really care about you getting to know me and me getting to know you. I'm just here to learn what I can to learn. And so some students feel that way. And so everybody's different. So obviously you have to navigate all that stuff. All right, well, thanks, Haps. Thanks, Hapsters. Thanks, y'all. Hope you have a nice rest of your day, wherever you are, whatever time you're at.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Looking forward to trying some things out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess I should mention that too. If you were interested in an application like this, like LT or LT sensors, yeah, we have free trials. We can send you some sensors for a short duration, demo periods, so you can try things out. So there are kind of low, no cost options to try things out if you were interested in dabbling in this as well. It's not like you have to pay for this to check it out kind of thing. So sorry, but yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.